and give a big hearty welcome to our first speaker. I mentioned him a little bit earlier, Admiral Dennis Blair. He is a distinguished public servant serving in the military, and he is really a great voice for us around the value of EVs. He's a huge EV enthusiast. We're really thrilled to have him back on our boot camp tour, if you will. Just love to welcome him, and I'll turn it over to you, Admiral Blair. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Sue. And it's great to be with the Wisconsin boot camp. I saw in the quick poll that you all took that, like most Americans, the primary motivation for EVs, the primary advantage of them, is thought to be environmental, and that's extremely important for the long-term health of our regions, our country, and our planet. But I just want to talk a little bit about the national security importance of the transportation sector as a whole. As Sue mentioned, we're still over 90% dependent on oil for the transportation sector. And let me just summarize and dramatize it. If the United States had not been 90% dependent on the transportation sector, if we had magically been an electrified transportation sector back in 2001, not only would there probably have not been a 9/11 attack, but we would not have been involved in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. We are just tied into the place where the oil comes from in a way that has just made our national security policy extremely aggressive, dependent, and militarized. And if we can get off oil in the transportation sector, we can do much better in terms of American national security, in terms of our values, not simply in terms of where the oil is and having to make a free supply. Second point, on the dependence on oil, which is traded on an international market, the price volatility has just been an enormous factor in hurting American economic development. Right now, for example, we're paying $3 a gallon for gas, right? Whereas a few months ago it was $2. How do people plan their lives, make their budgets, carry them out, get things done with oil flipping like that? And if you look back in history, big price run-ups in oil have been a big responsible part of the last 6 economic depressions we've had, including the really severe 2008, 2009 depression. So this business of oil is not only hurting the environment, but it's constrained the United States from both a national security and an economic point of view. And there's a real imperative to get off it, to have more control of our economic future, have more control of our national security future. But I do want to emphasize one other thing, that as we move into an electrified transportation sector, there's another danger looming, which is that we become just as dependent on China as we were on Saudi Arabia in terms of our transportation sector. The Chinese several years ago took a decision that they were not able to carve out a big role for their company and their companies in their country in the internal combustion engine, and so they have made a bet on the electric transportation sector. And in addition to having most of the battery mega factories in the world, in addition to pouring huge amounts of money into their own electrical vehicle companies, they have also locked down a large part of the supply chain for the essential ingredients of electric vehicles, including both the battery ingredients and the rare earths, which comprise a large part of the chips, which basically run the EVs. So we don't want to jump out of one national security dependency into another, and it's very important that as we develop the electric vehicle industry in the United States, we keep our supply chains either in the United States or with friendly countries not dominated by China, a country which is antithetical to our own values of freedom and free markets, which has been very happy to use its economic power against many countries in the world, Australia, the Philippines, Norway, the United States when it can. So as we move into the electric future, as we improve the environment, we have to keep our eye on national security factors, and steer that course between reducing our dependence on oil and ensuring that it's the United States that controls the energy future, the electric vehicle future, not China with its values extremely different from ours. So let me stop it there. And Ben, I think you're on the line, and maybe we have a few minutes left for some discussion rather than just straightforward assertions.
Well, I always appreciate the framing that you bring, and I think that it's the first time I've heard you sort of offer this idea of an alternative, sort of history around how the world could have looked if we had already moved to transportation electrification. So really powerful. One of the things that I'm interested in is, as you're looking at the sort of change in the administration and the idea that there is really this renewed, or maybe greater focus on transportation electrification, how are you at this point sort of viewing that? How do your peers view that within the sort of Energy Security Leadership Council and the opportunity that we might have now given the new leadership?
Yeah, certainly, as Sue mentioned, as we all know, the Biden administration is really all in for electrification, primarily motivated by environmental concerns, which are good, but also aware of the national security dimensions. I think, though, my experience has been, I really hope that the administration can reestablish bipartisan support for these measures, because this is something that's going to be going for a long time. There are going to be Democratic administrations, there are going to be Republican administrations, and unless we can gain a bipartisan approach to the urgency of this problem and the solutions, we're going to be either flip-flopping back and forth between policies, or we're going to be stymied. So the infrastructure bill right now, for example, which both the Republican versions of and the Democratic versions of place emphasis on the electrical grid, the importance of it being strong, on charging stations, and we just have to keep that bipartisan so that we can make steady progress, and not just rely on one administration to make a big jump only to be opposed by the next administration.
And sorry, I was muted, so apologies as I started to ask my question. But one more question. We never have enough time, unfortunately, with these. We always try to put so much content together. But you've walked the halls of Congress, and you've testified in state legislatures around the country. And you brought up the idea of that really EVs and transportation electrification needs to be a bipartisan issue. Are there any big tips that you might have for folks in Wisconsin as they're sort of jumping into this space more directly, around how to think about engaging a broader audience beyond just those environmental reasons? And I think you've helped frame them, but I think that's a good way for maybe to wrap up, is just your view on how to engage broader community and multiple voices.
Right. I just think we have to be balanced in our approach. I think most Americans, despite the media echo chamber on the far right and the far left, have a pretty sensible attitude. They don't want to make us dependent on OPEC. We don't want to be dependent on China. We want to have a cleaner environment, but we are where we are, and we just need to gradually make incremental progress. So I think that my advice is try to work at the retail level in small groups on sensible Americans who want to do the right thing for their country, for their kids, and that way we can make that sort of bipartisan and irreversible progress, which we really need.